Hey, good morning, Facebook and Get Inspired Michiana. Today is Friday, so it is time for Life Inspired. We do this every Friday morning at 9:30. I'm Diane Bennett with Inspired Homes in Michigan and RE/MAX 100 in Indiana. And our guest today is Art Wiers. Thank you so much for coming, Art.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So, as you know, Facebook watchers, we do this every Friday, and we ask our interviewees 3 questions about life was going along. There was a ... time in your life that kind of turned you to really want to follow God with your whole heart, and then now you're following God. What does an inspired life look like? So, I know you told me like 400 and some turning points in your life. So There's one in particular you're going to share with us today. So what was life like before that particular turning point that you're going to share about?
Yeah. Well, Diane, I was blessed to grow up in a Christian home.
Okay.
And was brought to church and worship on a regular basis every Sunday, and really experienced a good life, and especially a life about what is it like to live into the Christian faith, what is it like to experience Christ's love. Wasn't a perfect family, there is none, but
No.
it was a really wonderful family. And I was grateful for that, although we did have our trials. My mother, by the time I was in high school, was really handicapped.
Wow.
And suffered with crippling arthritis and lots of pain. And so as a young fella, I was trying to sort that out and live into those truths of Scripture that, you, in the midst of suffering, God is with you. Mm-hmm. Christ still loves you. And while at that time in my life, some of that didn't feel as real as I would have liked, it was real. Mm-hmm. And I'm really grateful for that. Mm-hmm. What I was really unaware, though, at that point in my life is, what was it like for people that didn't have that faith?
Oh, right. Because if you grew up in a Christian home, you probably thought everybody was.
Yeah,
I did.
At that stage of life, I was assuming that this is part of everybody's life.
Right.
I think I was incredibly, hopefully a bright guy, but incredibly naive about that. Right. And so as the Lord led, and I wanted to get through college, and nobody in my family had gone to college, and the only way to go to college was to earn your way through. Mm-hmm. One of the jobs I got that was particularly important in terms of the dots you talked about was a job actually doing door-to-door milk delivery, of all things, which unless you're my age or older, you won't know about.
Right.
So that goes way back.
I would love for you to share, too, before we get to your turning point there, I would love for you to share how you told me yesterday, you thought it was really funny that millennials are all excited about getting delivery stuff now when that's the way things used to be. Tell us a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, and I don't want to offend anybody in that generation. However, I think it's hilarious to watch millennials get excited about, well, Amazon delivers and other companies are delivering now. That's hardly a new concept. In fact, I was on the battling end of trying to keep that going in the early and mid-'70s when door-to-door delivery of food products, particularly dairy products and all the things that go along with that, had been commonplace for decades.
Right.
And it was going away because, well, hey, every family has 2 cars now. And there's big supermarkets. And we just go get the stuff.
Right.
And it became increasingly difficult to the point where there was no dairy that could sustain that.
Right.
And so if you would have told me that this would come back like this and millennials would be so supportive, let alone fascinated by it, I would have just laughed. Like, no, that couldn't possibly happen.
But it was a commonplace thing.
It was a commonplace thing. And the fact that they're now delivering groceries is almost hilarious to me.
Right.
I mean, in a good way.
Right.
I'm not against it.
No, for sure.
I just think it's so funny because in my lifetime it has gone
full circle.
Entirely, in my adult life, entirely full circle.
So you were a door-to-door milk delivery man for a dairy, and tell us how that affected. What was the turning point that made you move?
Yeah, well, what happened in that was it got me outside of my family of origin and the place where I was safe in my faith context, to where I started to see, wow, this just simply isn't true for a lot of people.
Right.
And living outside of that faith context is entirely different. And I started to see brokenness. I thought that having to deal with suffering internally in the family was really difficult. And then I started to realize, oh no, there are people who are just shattered out here. just shattered. And first milk run I was on, I had kids begging, literally hungry, begging at the door of my truck.
Wow.
And I was trying to figure out what to do with that. I was, one fellow attempted to stab me, two held me up at gunpoint. It was a very rough area, north side of Calumet City, Illinois. This was back in the early 70s. It was a huge wake-up call.
Right.
I was like, wow, there is a lot of brokenness out here. You know, I mean, you listen to the news is one thing, you know, but actually, as a young man, 18, 19 years old, on a truck, all of a sudden going, wow, this is different than the suffering at home where there's love for each other, you know the love of the Lord. Now, what about these people? What do we do about this level of brokenness?
Wow.
And it became a very convicting time.
We're back. Sorry,
Yeah.
there was a phone call on the phone.
Okay.
So the turning point was what exactly? What was it? Seeing the brokenness that made you turn?
Yeah, it was a gradual turning. I think I would share maybe the most vivid turning point in that part of the journey, which was my college years, and I recall this where I really felt convicted by God to, okay, you got to start living your faith out. You can't just look at this. You know, I can't. You know, it's one thing to observe it. It's another thing to feel motivated to enter into the situation. You got to start trying to deal with this and bring Christ's love to other people, because they're not going to come into churches and listen to this stuff.
True.
Right.
They're not.
I thought they would. That's even more naive, right? So, and my family, as solid as they were in their faith, were scared to death to share their faith with neighbors, which I think was typical of our traditions.
Okay.
I don't think that was just my family. I think that was normal. That was kind of the norm. I was on this milk route in a small town in northwest Indiana, and I was supposed to drop this one customer. She was a single mom, really struggling. Clearly things were out of control in her home. She was just having a terrible time. And in this small community, obviously, people hadn't been all that kind to her. And it was understandable because she was incredibly verbally abusive.
Of you?
Of everybody,
Wow.
including me.
So this is someone that you were delivering to?
Yeah, and my route manager had redlined the page, which meant no more credit, you're done. We're not giving you anything. Because we usually build once a month. And
so she had to pay cash to get anything?
Yeah, and so I was under a conviction that, somebody needs to show the love of Christ to this person. And I felt God saying to me, so?
What are you going to do, Art?
Yeah, so what are you doing? And I was like 20 years old, maybe, I don't know, right in that age group. And so I went to the door to explain that we weren't going to offer any more credit, but I would actually give product and I would pay for it myself. She used some really abusive language about that. She obviously had a teenager out of control in the house at the time. This was probably 10 in the morning. And I'm sure she actually thought I was doing it for sexual favors, which was God who loved her, and that I just wanted her to know that not everybody's against you, right? And we actually had a very strong verbal argument at the door, face-to-face, about that.
Wow.
And I said, well, and she was pretty desperate. They really were in genuine need. There was no doubt about that. So I said, I'm going to do this, and I will pay for it. Wasn't like I had a lot of money, but
You're
I could do this,
Yeah.
And I would just have to pay cash for it, leave it at the door. I did that over about a 3-month period.
So for 3 months you bought her milk.
Her spirit softened.
But you bought her milk for 3 months.
And she understood I wasn't lying.
Right.
That I had no intent to take advantage of her, or had no intent of, anything that would be immoral, or, I just really wanted her to see that God loved her. And now I didn't lead her to Christ, but I believe it was an entry point for her to start looking at life different. That was a turning point in my journey, because it was like, oh, I can personally engage in this.
Wow.
Now, eventually, the Lord led me to become a pastor, and I preached sermons, which is very different. But I'm still convinced that those are the things that Christ was most serious about.
Right.
That growing up, it took getting outside of my comfort zone to learn that.
Okay, so we're talking, and there's a lot of people in their 19 and 20s that might watch this story because your story is about when you were 19 and 20 and about.
Yeah.
So what would you say to them? How can a 19 or 20-year-old try to pursue God, try to live an inspired life? What can they do to live an inspired life?
That's a great question. And I would say the first thing I think you need to do is widen your vision and do your best to start listening beyond your concerns. You know, because I was pretty focused on my concerns. How am I going to pay for college?
Right.
You know what? God help me. That happened. You know,
Right,
beyond what I would have expected.
Right.
And once I was willing to widen my vision more for what God wanted me to do, all kinds of opportunities came. And so I would want to encourage a person at any age, but particularly at that age, you know, it's a great age to start looking at, so what is God really putting before me here, and why? You know, what is that really about? And what I found along the way is the more I did that, the more I was blessed. Every time.
The more you looked at what is God putting before me, the more you tried to have an open perspective and listen to others.
The more I was blessed. I'm absolutely convinced that's true, that's scriptural, and God will supply. He said he would supply.
Amen.
But it's hard for us in our brokenness to believe that.
Right.
At least it was for me.
Right.
And it's just I remember moving to Holland, Michigan to go to seminary. My wife and I were first married. And she was supposed to get a teaching job and didn't get a teaching job. And I was much more crushed by that than she was.
Really?
And I was angry at God. And I like Lake Michigan, so I went out on the pier in Holland and I told God, well, this just stinks. I was very angry. And I said, I just don't get this. She got a two-bit job at a bank that paid like half or third of what a teacher would have. I said, we're going to go broke, you know, all this kind of stuff. Which wasn't true at all.
Right.
And so I had backtracked a little bit in that part of my journey. And 2 years later, we were living in a historic mansion free. I had a new car in the garage.
Wow.
And I went back to the pier and I apologized. And said, I'm sorry. That was a bad day, I was stupid. Right?
And he said,
and my wife was doing extremely well, liked her work, it was right for her.
Interesting.
God had just supplied everything we needed and more. And it was like, well, I should have been quiet. You know, but I do believe as you're journeying along in life, if you're willing to widen your vision to what God wants you to do, he will supply.
Right.
And he will give you opportunities that will surprise you.
Right.
And frankly, for me, that's been incredibly rewarding.
Awesome. Very
Not
cool.
easy, but rewarding.
Right. True. Not easy, but rewarding. Very good thing to say. Well, Facebook, thank you for watching. Art, thank you for sharing. What a great story.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great to share.
So yeah, I know if any of you wanted to talk more with Art about questions you have about life or anything like that, I know that he'd be happy to have coffee. You can just message us right here in the feed and we'll get a message over to Art and he can meet you for coffee or whatever and tell you about this inspired life. So thanks for watching. You guys also message us if you know somebody that needs to share their story. We love to hear them. So thanks for watching and y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.